Cal, what's your take on this teacher strike?
Actually, I'm not surprised when you look at the statistics. The salaries haven't kept up with the cost of living. It and as basically public servants, they should at least have a public. They should at least be keeping up with inflation.
Yeah, well, they over the last 10 years had a 5.75% salary increase, which is way behind the inflationary rates in the country. They also have larger class sizes because MAGA Smith went to increase the population of Alberta by offering a $5,000, something ridiculous like that, if, for tradespeople to come to Alberta if you work a year. But the caveat was they had to work a year. And we all know that the climate of employment in Alberta is you're lucky if you get 6 to 8 months employment, then you're laid off. So she probably doesn't have to pay the money she promised because they're not going to have full-time employment for the year in most cases anyway. If not, 2 months of winter, a lot of construction jobs shut down because of the cold weather and put them on pogey. So that was an issue that got a lot of people to move to the province. Now we have 51,000 or teachers in the province, and some reports said we had 50,000 more students in the last couple of years come to Alberta. So there's a high teacher ratio for teacher to student in the classroom. Trying to find the stats on that, but
What I find different about Alberta education than most other provinces, if not all other provinces, is that Alberta funds private schools. That means that part of the public purse is going to private private schools and essentially elite forms of education. Obviously, they have fewer students per class. They have different activities, and they're essentially for the rich kids. And why public money is being spent on rich kids is appalling.
well, Red
Like
Deer has a lot of private schools and they're associated with big churches, and they have an elitist attitude that their education system is better than the public system. And why should a religious affiliation that isn't taxed have the right to offer these courses and classes for students where they're going to be not following just the public curriculum? So I do have some questions about that. I mean, we do have a split system where we have a Catholic religious school system and we have the public system, which is also not viable in today's modern world, I think. And these should be things that are actually put up for questions on: should private businesses like Catholic churches, which is the largest corporation in the world generating money, be afforded public dollars that are going to a standard public school system? So to have
I
private compete with public is not something I see as viable in the future.
here's an example. The upcoming budget proposals in Alberta will increase the spending on public schools at a rate that's less than inflation and at a rate that doesn't take into effect that you're going to have an influx of students. And if you look at the private sector, the private school funding, they're projecting it at $544 million, a 30% increase over 3 years, almost double the rate of inflation and the population growth. So it's a disproportionate amount of money that's now going to go to private schools. And I guess the parents want to cherry pick. They want their children to go with other children that are going to get more, personal instruction, more help with the problems that they have, that sort of thing. And I know that some schools like Weber, former Minister of Education, they will reject children if they're in
Oh,
their
they do?
class for a year or two and all of a sudden they're not keeping up. And keeping up means that they're beating the public schools with the averages. They will fire the kid. and that has detrimental effect on the the child's welfare. All of a sudden, he's been thrown out of the school where his friends were because he can't keep up or isn't a triple A student. So
Well,
there's a lot
it's
of
a two-tiered system when you start putting private against public, and that should never be funded by public money. And one of the issues of public money is that the school education tax is applied to your home tax bill and collected by your municipality and handed to the provincial government. One of the issues I have is that that money is thrown into general revenue, and we do not have a proper accounting of how much money was raised by taxes for the education system. And Smith is claiming that there's a $6.5 billion deficit on the federal general revenue fund, but she does not say how much a deficit there is on the money that was actually collected for education. And that is a smoke and mirrors way of approaching negotiations, because the funds have already been set down on your taxes for your residents, and those monies should be allocated for the purpose of what they were raised for, education. And if you're lying about the general revenue being the backbone of the taxation dollars for your education system, you're confusing or gaslighting the people on what you're spending on in your whole program as a government. I'm sort of out on this not keeping up with inflation for the teachers. It's a very easy contract negotiation that should be in all contracts, that they should keep up with inflation when you're a government employee or any other employee in the province. Once you've set a minimum wage or wage structure, whether union or non-union, you should be adhering to that, so there is no real renegotiations of those points. It should be keeping up with inflation. The ministers and the MLAs have all got pay raises, and they've got more than enough to keep up with inflation, so why would the teachers expect less? I don't think it's fair. It's not fair to the kids too to have a higher class to teacher ratio if that's the model of instruction you're going with.
Yeah, there's all kinds of problems here. And of course, one of the conservative think tanks, if you can call them think tanks, is the Fraser Institute. They make an interesting point here that Alberta spends the least amount per student on education, but in the past has had the highest scores on a program for international student assessment on math. Now, that's just one of many subjects, but when they go through in other words, what they're trying to say is throwing more money at the problem does not necessarily get better results. However, what they do point out is that Alberta students have declined in math skills from 2003 to 22 by 20 points, which is one grade level, and they've actually got a 45-point difference. So the average student today is 2 years behind in their math skills than they would have been in 2003. So you have
Wow.
to, yeah, you have to look at that, and so you can see if math is the indicator of then you can see that there's been a decline in standards in teaching in Alberta of some sort. Now, I also understand that the teachers are complaining that they're getting lumped together with special students, special needs students, and that sort of thing. And I can understand the thought process behind that, where you want to integrate people that have difficulties either socially or physically in a larger classroom environment. But on the other hand, you can't do that where the class size is over 30 or 40 people. It just doesn't make sense. You need either special educational tutors to be attending with these people, and some of them need physical assistance in order even to use the bathrooms, and can bring down the entire academic level of the whole class. But not only that, it burns out the teacher.
Is that part of the strategy of the Alberta government, is to burn out the teachers in the public teaching system so that there's less opposition to private funded schools that are usually religious based? Is that an ulterior motive that's being done to push parents to looking at these private schools?
Well, I can understand why people look at a private school. I know of one, their activities include things like, mountain climbing and glider flying and, all kinds of wonderful activities that you couldn't possibly afford to do with 34 kids. So
Yeah,
I understand that, but why should it be subsidized at the detriment of the public system? Like I can understand why people want their children to go to private school. It makes sense.
yes,
But they should also understand that they should be bearing the burden. Now they'll say that, well, my property, I pay taxes to go to the educational system. How come I don't get any benefit from that? So that's not fair. I shouldn't be paying property tax with a educational element. That's the argument that
oh
Alberta
yeah.
uses to fund it. Why should I be paying for some kid to take flight lessons?
Well, yeah, exactly. Why is that double standard? I mean, if you're paying your property taxes, that property tax is to go to the education of the community. So it's a community-based tax. It's not an individual paying the taxes. It's assessed over the whole community as to raise enough money for the education and the public education of students. It is your choice to send them to private and not take advantage of that money you're paying. But that money is based on the whole community, not just your property. And if you had the ability to remove yourself from that property tax, everybody else's property taxes would have to go up to compensate for your removal of your tax component. That wouldn't be fair to everybody in the community because the taxation is a community-based tax generation. If you have 1,000 people living in a community, they have the ability to raise the money based on that to make sure you have a good public education system, and that's what your taxes are funding. When you're saying, I don't believe in that public school system, I want my kids to have all the bells and whistles and a higher education because I'm better, I'm smarter, I'm better looking, I got more money, whatever, than my neighbor, then I think that type of education system you want for your kids is fine if you want to fund it, but you're still contributing to your neighbor's kids' education funding. So if you're going to be elitist in a province where a lot of people make a lot of money because it's oil and gas and they feel they're better than their neighbors or better than you and me, I don't believe in that system. I think the public system should not be funding any of these elitists with their attitude and wanting their kids to be better and smarter and have a better chance of getting into the top end universities than the average child. No, I don't agree in that. And that's why we have a public school system. And I don't believe religion should be getting money for school systems either. When you're a religious-based school, you should be classed as a private school, and our laws should change to reflect it. Any private school is not funded by public funds. That includes the Catholic school system.
Another issue I think the teachers have is a lack of respect that they now get from the community and from the school trustees and the parents and the children in general. And I know what I'm saying here is painting it with a broad brush, but by way of one example, I know of a gentleman who, and you have to remember too that demand for teachers goes up and down. At one point, teachers could not get a job. They were pumping out more teachers than there were positions. It seems that issue may have turned around. But as an example, the person I'm speaking of went to a small community in Alberta and found that the teachers were valued members of the community. They did things like the volunteer fire department, they managed the curling rink, they managed the hockey rink. They were a large part of the community. And when he was forced to move to Calgary because his wife got a job in Calgary, he found he couldn't even go into the school without having a janitor present and another teacher. Another example in the country school, they would mark the exams by passing, the tests by passing them forward or sideways or whatever. And the kids that scored well would help the kids that didn't score as well. So it was essentially a group effort. When he got to Calgary, they had a system whereby you had to scramble the names beside a number, and then you put the numbers up on the board so only the child allegedly knows what his number is, and the other children don't know how the other student is doing. Now, I don't know if that system is still in place or not, but
Wow.
of course, what he did was he went alphabetically so the kids could figure out who got
Who did
what.
who? Yeah.
He almost got fired.
Oh
And
crap.
and
Yeah.
and another point was when he went from one school board to the other, he lost some of his benefits. So there's a lot of a teacher to qualify for teacher. You need to go to 4 years of post-secondary education.
And there's some teachers that are really good teachers and others that are failed in their disciplines and then became teachers because they couldn't pass in their other discipline. That's what the old joke was when we went to university was if you failed in your discipline and you just go become a teacher. So about 20% of the teachers were actually people that should be teaching. The rest of them were, you know, failed in their initial disciplines and took teachers as a bailout. And sorry to say that, but not everybody should be a teacher. I've met this guy you're talking about. He's an excellent teacher, folks.
And the problem is there's two things going on with the profession of teaching. One is that you're a professional. The other is that you're essentially in a trade union, and
Yeah.
it creates a conflict. I don't know how teachers will ever resolve that because there's a different set of standards for trade unions than there are for professional associations. So they're stuck in between, and it gets disclosed on an issue like this when they go on strike. Like you would never hear of engineers going on strike or lawyers going on strike or doctors really going on strike. So the teachers have to use a form of coercion in order to justify their demands that isn't applied to any other profession. And I think that is one of the respect issues. The other one is management often doesn't stand up for the teacher because it's a lot easier to stand up for the parent. And the parents, they believe in little Johnny. When he comes home and says that, the teacher was rude, all of a sudden the teacher's going, I don't know what you're talking about. Like you can't discipline children anymore.
No, and
You
that's
know,
one of the problems is the whole environment of this woke movement and changing the rules and teaching. I can't see why anybody would want to be a teacher now. I really, there's too much risk. Any kid can make an allegation and you're the brunt of the allegation and you can't discipline. Well, if you can't discipline, I mean, I don't believe in abuse, but you should be disciplined. I mean, I was a little brat in school and I got disciplined and that straightened me right out. And, you know,
I'm not sure about that.
Oh, well, it tempered my behavioral patterns, which, if you're a psychologist, you know what tempering behavioral patterns is, and there's no way of disciplining kids in your classroom. So I see the model shifting for the future. I see that, they're arguing about how their class sizes and structure is right now and the allocation of money for budgets for equipment and activities and stuff like that. But let's face it, folks, with the advent of AI, teaching's going to take a radical change and fast. Within the next 5 years, there's going to be some radical changes in the teaching models that we're going to be using. And Alberta could be a front runner to that because we can afford to put computers in the classrooms and have one teacher teach 1,000 kids on the classroom and provide support structures for those kids that need individual one-on-one class tutoring. And that tutoring can be very economical to get kids the needed time they to develop their knowledge and critical thinking skill. If we allocate that theory that AI is going to become a dominant figure in education, then we can see that we can use technology more efficiently to give a better and stronger education system. Usually conservatives do not want that because, like MAGA USA, it's the stupider you are, the better it is for the politicians. So up here in Canada, I think we still have the idea that education should be the forefront of our social goals. Now, I'd like to see the advent of a model development where we have teachers teaching classrooms via internet, where you can have a preparatory style for university where you got to have a little bit of self-motivation to educate yourself at the same time as having the support structures in place, like teachers assistants and one-on-one access if you're having problems with that. And that would take away the need for homeschooling because you can do it over the internet quite easily. And I think through COVID, we've seen that there was an ability to teach using computers and modern technology. And this is something that I think Alberta should be looking at as a leader in the world for education. And we definitely need to shut down this private school funding. That is ridiculous. I don't know what your take is on that, but
Well, Alberta already has a virtual school curriculum, so it isn't beyond the realm of possibility to move a lot of the classrooms back into the houses, the homes. But one of the issues that you look at there is, with the standard of living the way it is nowadays, we're back to a situation where both parents have to work.
yes,
And
and that's a problem.
like it or not, the school is almost a babysitting service for a lot of people. If one of the kids wasn't in school, then the parent would have to stay home, and so that's another issue that gets
But
complicated.
thinking outside the box, I mean, the school system is a social conditioning system for kids to interact with people and learn to play sport and negotiate with friends and stuff to get everyone to get along. So if we understand that and we go to the homeschool model, then as an education system, we have to make sports and interaction a part of that model, which wasn't done during COVID because of the close proximity issues of spreading viruses. So we can add to the model and develop a new system of access for fitness and participation where you have to actually participate in events for X number of hours a week, which fills the role of here's some free babysitting for your kids to go to school. So it really wouldn't affect the time they have to spend at the school. It would only affect the time that they have for studying. So they can study at whatever hours they want, but you still attend school during work hours, which are, 8 to noon and 1 to 4 or 3 or whatever you want to do for the kids, so that it helps parents with their babysitting issues. That I could see as thinking outside the box. But this education model that we're using right now, it has some inherent failures in modern society. And like you said, where there's a double working family, well, everybody has to work. It's not building a strong community base for the kids. And we're seeing it in how the family nucleus is being developed now. And I think that's one of the disadvantages is we don't have a nuclear family system or the community building aspects. I mean, look at it here in Calgary, you don't even know your neighbor. And you have very little interaction with anybody in your block. So this becomes an issue for community and social behaviors, which is part of your education system, folks. And that is something that they maybe have to look into modeling better. We can always do better.
And by way of example, they're estimating that the cost of a 4-year degree in Alberta is between 56 to over $180,000 a year for tuition, living expenses, based on the high estimate in 2024. That's a lot of money to invest in a job that may not exist when you graduate.
And you know
And
what? I believe that higher education should all be free. We should be modeled like a lot of these European countries, and we can afford it. Being gaslit by Smith that she $6 billion in the hole because she mismanaged our resources, can't deal with budgeting, gives money away to all rich corporations, won't tax the rich, lets them have the privilege, lets them take our tax dollars and have private schools funded so they can, take skydiving lessons and all sorts of shit that the average person can't. That's bullshit, folks. And we should be never have any of our students pay for education. If education was free, we'd have a smarter population. People like me would even pick up courses and go back to school because it's free. We have to compensate the cost of downtime from work or revenue generation. So why shouldn't education be free? We paid for the education of the teachers, we pay for the buildings, and we should be getting free education instead of foreigners taking our money offshore and taking the profits generated out of our communities and then being subsidized by our government so that these politicians can get reelected and have the money to buy media and advertising to bullshit you into voting them in. We should have free education. We can afford it, and we can benefit from free education. I think we're totally out to lunch allowing this type of mismanagement of our assets and mismanagement of our tax dollars to the detriment of our society as a whole. That's my stance on education. It should all be free, and there should be no elitism in our education system. If you want to do private school, you go pay for it, you set up your private school, and by the way, private school makes money, we're taxing you on it too. So there's the difference.